It's a bit like the old days for me, the government on the run, the opposition in pursuit. A headline in The Sun this morning saying, Brown wrong. Another example of the very close relationship I have with News International. It's like the old days with one exception. If I had not come to the House this afternoon when I was Prime Minister in a debate in which the Prime Minister is implicated, I hesitate to think what these members of It is my judgment that we should reform but never undermine something so fundamental to our ordered liberty, our twin commitments to both the freedom of the individual and to a free press. And I rise in this debate, Mr. Speaker, not to speak about myself, but to speak for those who cannot defend themselves. For the grieving families of our brave war dead, for courageous survivors of 7/7, for many others dignified but now outraged victims of crime, and most recently, and perhaps worst of all, the victims of the violation of the rights of a missing and murdered child. Many, many wholly innocent men, women and children who at their darkest hour, at their most vulnerable moment in their lives, with no one and nowhere to turn, found their properly private lives, their private losses, their private sorrows treated as the public property of News International, their private innermost feelings and their private tears bought and sold by News International for commercial gain. In the announcements by B-Sky-B and in the subsequent announcement by Ofcom only a few minutes ago that they are now examining whether B-Sky-B is a fit and proper person or organisation for the 38% of B-Sky-B that they still hold. But, Mr. Speaker, when there have been great occasions and great questions of moral concern, it has been this House that has spoken for Britain. And over the next few months, this House must show it can rise to the challenge. For with the exception of decisions on peace and war, there is no matter of greater importance than the basic liberties of our citizens. And each generation has to reconcile for its times the freedom of the individual with the freedom of the press, and to balance two great rights, the right of the public to information and the right of the individual to privacy. Because of what happened to my children, whose privacy at all times I have tried to protect, I have been sent, I have been offered, I have had thrust upon me what is now for the police to examine, a great deal of evidence that is relevant to this debate. It is right for the House to know that damage done in the last 10 years to innocent lives was avoidable and could have been avoided. As early as the winter of 2002, senior police officers at Scotland Yard met the now Chief Executive of News International and informed her of serious malpractice on the part of our newspaper staff and criminals undertaking surveillance on their behalf. And the new investigation will no doubt uncover why no action was taken within News International and what lay behind the subsequent promotion of that junior editor concern. And in that context, and again because of what happened to my family, I've been made aware of an additional and previously unexamined stream of orders by one of the editors at News International, Mr. Alec Marinchek, to hack and to intrude, a man who was subsequently promoted to be a full editor of a regional edition of the News of the World. Mr. Speaker, as we now know, a cover-up can be more damning than the original crime. And the decision of the News International chairman to pay without reference to his board some victims sums of around £500,000 may now be seen as the buying of silence. And given his statements to this House, this must now be the subject of a full parliamentary as well as police scrutiny. News International and every other responsible paper should in future be obliged to publish not on page 35 or 27, but on page 1, apologies to all individuals whose rights have been infringed. And perhaps this will be called, as perhaps we will know in future, by the name of one of its saddest victims, as happened with Sarah's Law, the naming of shaming of criminals inside the media, which will require News International to practice what they have so self-righteously preached to other people. So, having seen the Select Committee report, I immediately asked the head of the civil service to agree that we set up a judicial inquiry. Far from the so-called cosy relationship alleged with News International that would have meant doing nothing, My answer to what appeared to be News International's abuse of press freedom was a full judge-led inquiry to meet growing public concern. And let me summarise the formal advice contained in a memorandum to me rejecting such inquiry. That while there were some new facts, there was a media culture permissive of unlawful activities and deliberate obfuscation by News International. The Select Committee did not believe that the practices were still continuing and thus did not meet the test of urgent public concern, that time had elapsed and evidence may have been destroyed, that the news of the world and individuals had already been punished by resignations and jail terms, that there was no evidence of systemic failure in the police, and anyway all the decisions had been checked with the Crown Prosecution Service, and that targeting the news of the world could be deemed to be politically motivated because it was too close to the general election and would inevitably raise questions over the motivation and urgency of an inquiry. The memorandum stated, I think for the benefit of the future debates on this and the inquiry, this information is indeed very relevant. Mr. Speaker, the memorandum stated that if an appeal was made against a judicial inquiry, such a challenge might succeed. And there was not only no case for a judicial-led inquiry, but not a strong case either for a non-judicial inquiry, or even for a reference to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, or even to ask the police to reopen their inquiry.
Point of order, Mr. Graham.